Good evening. In previous session, we have completed the concept of regular expressions. So in today's session, we are going to see about the concept of database. That means Python database connectivity. If you want to connect database with your Python program, how to connect that? So first we will see what is meant by database and what is the need of connecting to a database. Okay, right. Now our concept is Python database programming. Python database programming. So before going to this, I want to tell you one thing that here till now we know the concepts of Python. We have seen the concepts of Python. We don't know the concepts of database. So for this session, I am going to give a brief introduction about the database because it is a different subject from our Python. Okay. So just I will give a brief introduction and I will explain the concept of how we are going to connect Python to database. Okay. Right. Now, first I want to talk about a Python. So what is meant by a Python? Python is a programming language. Okay, it is a programming language. So what is database? It is different. Okay, it is different. This is a database. So whatever the language we are using is a Python programming. And here it is what? It is a database. It is going to use some other language called as SQL. Okay. Or okay, structured query language. We can call it as a structured query language. So how to communicate between these two? This is different and this language is different and this language is different. How to communicate between our Python programming and database? First we have to understand that one. So let us consider here two persons are there. He knows only Telugu, he knows only English. So how to communicate, how these two people can communicate each other? So in between, they will keep one translator. So translator will do what? He can understand Telugu, he will convert it into English. He will understand English, he will convert it into Telugu. In this way, this translator is going to do. In the same way here, if you want to communicate, that means what? If Python program want to communicate with database, we require one drivers or translators. Let us take it as a drivers. So in between we are using the concept of drivers, which is going to communicate, which is helping us to communicate between Python programming and our database. Okay. First, let us see what is meant by a database and what is the need of a database. Let us see here. So first we have to understand why we are coming for the database. All in the database. So you can observe what data. So for storing the data, we are having different storage areas. For storing the data, we are having different storage areas. For example, what is the need of data storing means? So generally, if you are going to consider any college, there for storing the student information, for storing student information, I require a database. Or if you are going to consider your mobiles, there we are going to have some call data. For calling information or call information, we are going to use some database. So that means what? Here we are using it some data. So for example, for employee information also we require some. We are getting some data. So and we are having customer transactions, banking information, or banking transactions. Okay, there are many things we are there where we are going to get the data. So to store the data, generally we are going to use the concept of file system generally. Okay, so already in our Python sessions also I have discussed about how to retrieve the data from a file and how to write the data to a file. So we can store the data in files also, but there also we are having some disadvantage. Okay, so first I will discuss what are the different types of storage locations we are having and what are the disadvantages of previous things and why we are coming to this database. I will explain now. So generally data can be stored in two memory areas, mainly two storage areas. First one is temporary storage. That means we can categorize into two. Those are temporary temporary storage, because that means I am talking about Python only. And second one is permanent storage. Permanent storage. Okay. Now observe. So what is meant by temporary storage? Temporary storage means if it is in active state, it may be anything. If you are going to consider our computer, our system, so in that main memory is a temporary storage. It is what? Temporary storage. So we are going to call it as a volatile memory also. And next, if you are going to consider your hard disk drive, it is called as a permanent storage. Why we are calling main memory as temporary storage and why we are calling hard disk as a permanent storage means whenever the power is going to be switched off, then automatically the data that is present in your main memory is going to be removed automatically. That means if you want to get back that, it is not possible generally. Next, what about this hard disk? So if you are in between, if you are going to watch a movie, for example, if you are watching the movie, in between power is disconnected to your system, then what happens? The files that are present in the hard disk are going to be present in your system. If you come back after coming to the power is going to be there, that means after power came, if you are going to switch on your system also, there is no problem. Whatever the files that are present in the hard disk will not be deleted. Those are going to be permanent. It is going to be permanent. What about main memory? Whatever this, that means let us consider now current view of our system. What you can see here, it is a command prompt. It is a Python program shell, Python editor. It is a paint application. It is a MySQL. It is a GoToMeeting. That means what? All these applications are running in my system. So all those are present in my main memory only. Once if my system is going to be shut down, unfortunately, then what happens? All these things are going to be removed from your main memory. That means for temporary storage, these are not available. Once if I'm writing this here, I have written some data here in this application. So if unfortunately my system was shut down because of some reasons, so if we come back to my if I switch on my system once again, will this paint application is going to be opened? No, this data is going to be lost. What about your D drive and F drive files? Those are going to be present. There is no problem. So those are called as what? Permanent storage, and these are called as what? Temporary storage in our system view. But coming to our Python, what is meant by permanent and what is meant by temporary storages? Let us see now. So what is meant by temporary storage? Already we know how to store the data by using the concept of data types. So everything is an object. So we are having some Python objects. We can call them as a Python objects. So those are what? Integer objects. We can call it as integer objects, or we can have list objects. We can have tuple objects. We can have dictionary objects. We can have set objects, and so on. There are many different type of objects we are going to have to store the data. So what is the use of this int data type? It can store only one value. It is an integer type only. So what about all these things here? These type of objects can store any number of data. Okay, group of data or collection of data we can consider. So let us consider this collection of data only. So if I'm going to create some a equal to 10, 20, 30, 40. So now this is written in my program. Whenever I am going to execute this program, then internally what happens? Internally, for this a, some memory is going to be created, and in that we are going to have what? 10, 20, 30, 40 will be present. So until what time this memory is available, this a is available in your memory? It is only until your program is present in the memory. So until that time only a value is going to be present. That is what 10, 20, 30, 40 are present. Once if you are going to close your program, or if you are going to close your shell, Python shell or Python editor, then what happens? Automatically this is going to be removed. That means what? This list, tuple, dictionary, set, all these data types or data objects can be considered as temporary storage. Those are going to be available only up to that program is there in your memory. If program is not present or program is going to be closed, then automatically those are going to be deleted from your memory. So I can call this one as a temporary storage. Now coming to permanent storage. So if I want to discuss about a permanent storage, generally I have to go for the concept of files. So why we are going to create this list, tuple, dictionary and set? Only for the purpose of that program execution. If I'm going to close that program, no need of having the values. For example, a equal to I'm going to write a small program, a equal to 10, b equal to 20 and c equal to a plus b. I'm going to write. So this is one program I have written. So when the memory is going to be allocated for this a and b, while I'm going to execute this program, a memory is going to be allocated and b, for b also we are going to allocate some memory. So after that, this a plus b is going to be performed and that value is going to be stored in C. Okay, these memory locations are available only up till the program execution is there, or if I am going to close this program or shell, automatically this memory is going to be disappeared. So these are temporary, these are only temporary memory that is going to be allocated for this program. Okay, this is only for the program purpose. But what is meant by permanent storage? For example, if we are going to consider a bank, if you are going to consider a bank information, so now this is about temporary, I'm going to remove it. Okay, now I want to talk about a permanent data, where you can see the permanent data. If I am going to consider student information, so he has joined in first BTech. He is going to study BTech, that is nothing but engineering. So he has joined in first BTech. He has completed his first BTech. So university server has to contain what? His 1 marks and 1 marks. It has to be there. Next, he has completed his second BTech. So in the server, what should be there? 2 marks and 2 and so on until up to fourth year. He has completed his fourth year. Then what happens? Up to 3 his marks has to be present in the memory. Okay, after 4 for example, after 4 all these marks should be available for the server, in the server. That means what? The student information is what? Permanent storage. This data will not be removed until he is going to complete his BTech, for example. Okay, that means this data has to be available in some place, in some permanent storage area. Otherwise, better example, if you are going to consider bank account. So every time if you are going to, let us consider, if you are going to insert or if you are going to deposit some amount, the transaction details will be there. Whenever you are going to withdraw the amount, the data will be there, that information will be there, and so on. If you are going to perform any operation in your bank account, then everything has to be stored somewhere. Okay, so for that I require permanent storages. So generally, what are the permanent storages we are using? Okay, first one is basic thing is files. Files are permanent storages. Okay, that means what? If you want to store any data permanently, then I can go for the concept of files. So next, databases. We are having the concept of databases for permanent storage. And why we are going for databases? Because file size is somewhat limited, and so that we are going for databases. Okay, when comparing to the data warehouses, databases are very small. Data warehouses. Next, after that we can go for big data. So as the data is growing day by day, the size of the storage has to be increased. So initially we have used files. After that we are using databases. After that we went for data warehouses. Now we are using big data concept. In future there may be a different type of technologies may be there. Okay, so we are talking about the concept of databases. That means If you want to store the data permanently, till now we have seen the concept of files. So that we are going to see the concept of databases. So before going to see the concept of databases, why we have to go to databases from files? We have to observe that case. A reason. So if you are going to consider a file, what it contains generally. So if a file may be doc file, .doc, .txt, .png, .mp4. It may be anything. So whatever the data you are going to store permanently in your computer will be stored in files only. If you see here, if you see anything here, it will be a what? Finally, it will be a file. This is a file. Next, this is a file. This is a file. Everything is a file. Okay. So generally, the data in your computer, or we can consider the data in your hard disk, will be stored permanently in the form of files. Okay. But what is the disadvantage of these files? Only limited amount of data can be stored. MBs, or maximum GBs. We cannot store more than that. Okay. Gigabytes we will go up to TBs. We cannot store in the files. We cannot store in TBs. So that we are going for the concept of databases. So first I will tell you the limitations of these files. First I will discuss about the limitations of the files. Later I will tell the advantages of your databases. So first point is what? Disadvantages of files. So by seeing these disadvantages only, we have to go to other concept. Disadvantages of files. So what are the disadvantages of files? First point, less amount of information. Only less amount of information only we can store here. Okay. Next, second point is no security for data. We cannot give the security for this data which are going to be stored in the files. And if we want to perform any operations, like let us consider I am having one file. In that I have stored some data, 10, 20, 30, 500, 600, 700 data I am going to store. For example, here some names are there, Shiva, Ram, and so on. Here I want, this is IDs, for example, or some amount. I want to get the data or the IDs whose IDs are less than 50 or less than 100. So we have to get these data, these IDs. So is there any type of methods or any type of support is going to be given by our files? It is not such easy to give. That let us consider this as a notepad. Better I will consider. If you go to Excel, there is some support we are having. But if you are going in Excel, we cannot store a huge data. Okay. So you cannot perform. If you are going to consider it as a notepad, there is nothing but .txt file, for example. In that, if we want to perform any operation on this data, it is not possible. If you want to perform any operation like average, sum, and so on, if you want to perform any type of these type of operations, we cannot perform. Okay, it may be Excel can perform up to some data, up to some operations it can perform. It can be performed on limited data only. It cannot perform unlimited data. That means huge data it can perform, not unlimited data. It cannot perform on huge data. Up to MBs it can do. Now, next point is, so let us consider there is a duplicated data in Notepad. Is it possible to find out when we are going to write? For example, I am going to write ID here. In my entries in Notepad is nearly I have entered 2000 entries. 2000 entries I have entered here. Unfortunately, one duplicate ID is there. If I am going to enter duplicate ID, already 513 is there. If I am going to enter the ID 513 at 2001 location, can I identify identify whether it is already present in my data or not. Is it easy to find out that? Is it easy to find out the duplicates? It is not such easy to find out the duplicates in our files. So data is duplicate. Generally in files, duplicated data cannot be found. Okay, but in our concept of this is one of the disadvantage. Data duplication is one of the problem. So here no technique is there to overcome this data duplication. That means data redundancy. We can say it as a data redundancy. So to find out or to overcome this problem, we are not having any technique. So let us consider I'm going to enter. Generally, I'm going to take a phone numbers. I'm going to take student phone numbers. So 1,000 students are there in my school. So I want to take everyone's phone number. First, I'm going to enter name and I'm going to enter some phone number. Okay. And after that, I'm going to enter some name and I'm going to enter some phone number. And so on. I have entered many things. And at the 500th entry, somebody has given some name called as Hari. And he has given the same mobile number what they have given here. Someone has given here. Can I identify these duplicates? It is not such easy to rectify this problem. Can I identify it? Is not such easy to identify that easily. So is it not allowing me to enter this duplicate value? No, it is allowing me to enter the duplicate value. But is it correct? Duplication should not be allowed generally because already it is there. How it is going to allow? It is one of the disadvantages of your file. So these are the, by seeing these disadvantages, we are going for the concept of databases. Some solution has to be there for all these disadvantages of files. So all to overcome these disadvantages, we are going for the concept of databases. So now let us see what is the use of databases. So as we have seen some of the disadvantages of your files, we are coming for this databases. So first thing is what? We can store huge data. We can store huge data when compared to the files. We can store huge data when compared to the files. Next, here already I told there something like we are not having any operations, internal operations are not there or internal methods are not there. If you are going to write any data on data onto the file, if you want to perform any operations like sum, average and all these concepts, internally it is not going to give any support. But here in databases, we are having the concept of query languages, standard query languages or structured query languages. So here these languages are going to give some of the functions we are having in these query languages, which are going to give the support for our data. That means what? For the data, if you want to perform average or if you want to sort out some values from the data, so for that we are having some methods or functions we can say from our query languages. That means directly I can say that this query language is going to give support for us to perform some of the operations very easily. So query languages are there for giving the support for our operations. Next, here security is very high. Security is there if you are going to store the data in our databases. Next, so if you are going to consider, if you are going to store the data in your files, it may be any type of file. There generally the data is going to be stored in the form of we can say it as a what? Structured, unstructured or semi-structured. But here in our database, data is organized. That means what? Data is going to be stored. Data is stored in the form of tables. That means what? We are going to have row and columns here. Okay. And also very important thing to say here, to avoid the duplicates, here we are having the concept of unique key. We are having concepts of what? Like unique key and duplicate keys. We are having these concepts in our database. So by using this unique key and duplicate keys, we can avoid the duplication concept. So these are the some of the advantages why we are coming for the from files to databases. Now, as we have seen some of the advantages of databases, we have to see some of the limitations also. Okay. So as we are saying here, we can store huge data when compared to the files. But if you are going to terabytes and zettabytes, the information cannot be stored in databases. So that we have to go for next technology like data warehouses or big data. So here it cannot store, again same thing I can write here, cannot store huge data, cannot store huge data in the sense zettabytes, or we can say it as a terabytes also, it may not store sometimes. Okay, cannot store huge data. So for this we have to go for what, data warehouses, or we can go for big data. Generally we will use big data concepts after these databases. Next, here cannot store, already I told all this point here, it can store only in the form of tables. So it cannot store semi-structured data, or we can say it as what, next one, unstructured data we cannot store here. Unstructured data cannot be stored and semi-structured data cannot be stored. So only structured data can be stored in databases. So these are the some of the limitations of the databases and some of the advantages of the databases. So now our point is, I means what, my Python program want to retrieve the data from databases, and I want to my Python program want to write some data to the databases, because in many applications nowadays everything is going to be, artificial intelligence is going to be plays major role in our daily life. So if you're going to consider machine learning or deep learning or computer vision, everywhere we require what, mainly data is required. So major role in our life, who is going to play major role in our life? Data. So data is going to be plays major role in our daily life. So if we want to if we want to store the data, we require databases generally, or if we want to store huge data, we are going for big data. So mainly we are focusing on these databases. So first we have to understand the importance of data. After that, where we have to store the data. On that data, we can perform any algorithms, machine learning algorithms. It may be machine learning algorithms, it may be deep learning, it may be computer vision, or it may be any type of things. If you want to perform any type of visualization, data visualization, or data science algorithms, or if you want to do any type of analysis on this data, or if you want to use that data, compulsory it has to be stored in some place, in some permanent storage, or maybe temporary storage also. But generally we will store the data in permanent storage only, like databases. So if you want to perform these type of operations or analysis or visualization of our data, compulsory we have to store the data in some place. That place is called as nothing but databases. Generally in real time we will use databases only. But if you are going for any software companies or any other huge organizations, they are going to use the concept of big data. Okay, right. So that now we have to understand how our Python is going to give support for these databases. And before going to see the concept of databases in our Python, I will list out some of the databases. So we are having many databases. Among them, mainly I am going to show you, I am going to discuss how to connect and how to retrieve the data from our MySQL database. So there are many databases, like we can say MySQL, and we are having mainly SQL Server, or we can say it as a Oracle SQL. Next, we can have MongoDB, or Gadfly, SQLite, and so on. Many other databases we are going to have. But if you are going to understand at least one database, how we are going to connect, how we are going to use the standard structured query languages and everything, if you understand about one language, if you understand, remaining all are same, but the representation of that query language may be different. but remaining steps will be same. So mainly I will focus on only one database, that is MySQL database I am going to use, and I will tell you the stepwise. That means what? How to create and how to connect, okay, how to retrieve and how to close everything step by step I am going to execute. So these, if I discuss about these steps initially, these steps will be same for every database. There is no problem. But generally what you have to understand, you have to understand the query languages that are used for these remaining databases. Okay, right. So first I am going to discuss about what are these main steps that are going to be involved in our connecting the database, or we can say that what are the standard steps that are used in this Python database programming. I am going to discuss now. So steps, I'm going to write what? Steps to connect and to do everything in the database. First step is what? Okay, before going to this, what I have to discuss is, so let us consider I want to perform multi-threading concept. I want to perform the concept of multi-threading. Okay, so for performing the multi-threading concept, already we have seen many examples regarding to this multi-threading concept. So if you want to use the concept of synchronization, for example, or thread, I want to access the concept of thread class. From where you are going to import all these things? We are having a module called as threading module. Okay, that means if you want to perform any application by using this multi-threading, I require a module called as multi-threading. In the same way, for any task, if you are going to perform, previously we have seen some regular expressions concept. So if you want to use regular expressions in your Python, then we have to use a module called as RE. Okay, in the same way, if you want to perform the concept of database programming in our database in our Python, we require some modules to be imported in our program, so that as I am talking about MySQL, for example, I'm talking about MySQL. So for MySQL, we are going to have a module called as pym. This is MS-SQL. Okay, this is a for MySQL I'm going to take. So this is one of the module I have to import when I'm talking about MySQL database. If you are going to talk about Oracle database, then if you want to access or if you want to use the Oracle database with your Python programming, compulsory we have to import a module called as cx underscore Oracle. So if you are dealing with Oracle database, compulsory this module has to be imported. If you are dealing with MySQL or Microsoft SQL, we can say Microsoft SQL, then compulsory we have to deal with what? We have to use the concept of PYMS SQL. There is nothing but Microsoft SQL, Python, Microsoft SQL, we can consider it. So for Microsoft SQL, we have to use what? PYMS SQL. Okay, right. Now I am going to show you some of these steps generally that are used to perform the database programming in Python. That is, first one is what? Importing. First one is what? Import module. Import a module of the database, or we can say what? Import the module of a specific database. That means what? If you are dealing with Oracle database, you have to import the respective module, or if you are going to use Microsoft SQL, there you have to use what? You have to use particular module, and so on. Okay, now next one. After importing this module, then what we have to do here? Some module is ready for. This is my Python program. Observe carefully. This is my Python program. In this, I have imported some of the database related functions into my program. So I am having the functions now in my program. Functions are available. So by using those functions, what I have to do, I have to communicate with the database. Where is database? Is it related to your Python? It is not related to your Python. It is somewhere, it is a separate component. It is not in your Python. It is separately present in some location. So I want to communicate with these two. That means what? Python and database I have to communicate. So that I have to establish some connection. I have to establish some connection so that I can communicate. That means that Python program can communicate with database, and database can send the data to the Python, and so on. That means what? First you have to import the module, and later you have to establish the connection. What is that? Establish the connection, right? After establishing the connection between the Python program and database, so what we have to do? That means we can communicate, establish a connection. For that, we are going to use a function called as connect. We are going to use a function called as what? Connect. So first point was what? Import a specific database module. If you are going to use Microsoft SQL, there we have to use some PYMS SQL module. Or if you are going to use Oracle database, there we have to import which type of module? CX_Oracle module. So after importing that, I want to connect. That means Python Pro. If I want, a Python program has to communicate with database. So that I require the connection between these two, Python program and a database. For that, I have to establish a connection by using a function called as connect. Okay. Next, third step is, so now connection is established. So now this database, this Python program and your database can communicate. For that, what your database can understand? SQL. That is nothing but your structured query language. Okay. So to execute those SQL queries, to execute the SQL queries, okay, after executing this query language, and to store or to hold, I can say to hold the result, to hold the results, to hold the results, we are using a function, or we can say we are using cursor concept. We are using cursor. For that, we are using a function called as cursor method. I can say, okay, function or method, maybe no problem. So cursor method I am going to use. So first one is what? Import. Second one is what? Establish a connection. So connection is established between these two. So they have to communicate now. So how they can communicate? This Python has to speak the language which database can understand. That is nothing but SQL. So in our Python program, we have to write some SQL commands or SQL queries. So to execute that, we are going to use the concept of cursor method. So after getting the result also, this cursor is going to hold that result. So don't worry, everything is going to be shown for you. Next. So that is nothing but what? To execute SQL, we require a cursor method. Or okay. To execute, I want to discuss one more point, or I will discuss the next step, like a step 4. So how to execute these SQL queries? So for executing SQL queries, who is going to execute these SQL queries? Cursor object. By using cursor object, we have some methods, or we can say by using cursor object methods. Okay, we can say what? For executing SQL queries, who is going to execute? Cursor is going to execute. So that cursor methods are there. Some cursor methods are there. That means how cursor is going to execute that? By using some methods. What are those methods? First method is execute method. That means I am telling, cursor is telling to execute. What it has to execute? Some SQL query. It has to execute what? SQL query. So here, that means what? Only I have to write some query here that will be executed by your cursor. That means I can say here only single query I can write here. For execute, I can write what? Single query. And if you want to use the concept of execute script, we are having one more function called as, or method called as execute script. Here we can write group of queries. Group of queries we can have. In above here execute, we are having what? We can execute only one single query. But if you are coming for execute script, for that we can pass what? Multiple SQL queries as a arguments. So here it can execute what? Group of SQL queries. So how these are going to be separated? So group of SQL queries separated by semicolon. Separated by what? Semicolon. That means what? In between the query and query, there should be a semicolon should be there. Okay. Next, if I want to execute same like a SQL script, observe carefully here. Execute many is there. Execute many. So here I can pass some arguments, or we can say it as a parameterized query I can pass here. So this is what? Execute many. So for what we are going to write, this is going to execute a parameterized query. A parameterized query. So here we can pass what? Parameters we can pass here. Okay. So these are the main important steps. After this, if you are going to consider, some more methods are there and some of the important functions are there. So when we have to use them, so these are the main steps. Okay, first one is what? Importing module. Next, establishing a connection. After that, executing the queries by using the cursor. So for executing those queries, I require some functions. I require what? Some functions. So or some methods. Those are what? Execute script, and execute many. So I can use these methods I can use. But in that execute script or execute many, what are the different type of queries you are going to use? Which type of query language you are going to use? We have to see. In that execute, we have to see some of the data definition languages, data query languages, DML and DCL. We can apply in that execute or execute script or in execute many. So let us see what are the different type of languages we are having in SQL only. First one, DDL. Next one, DML. Next one, DQL. And next one we can also say we can also take DCL. So generally we will see mainly about these three only. So what is meant by DDL means data definition language. Data definition language. And DML means data manipulation language. Data manipulation language. Okay. Next, DQL, data query language. Data query language. And finally, DCL is data control language. Data control language. So just briefly, I will discuss about these things, and I will write you some of the commands what we are going to use under these query languages, these languages. Okay. First one is data definition language. That means by using these type of commands, we are going to define that language. That is, for example, we can take some commands like create, alter, drop, next rename, truncate. And for example, I'm going to tell here, okay, truncate. So these are called as what? Data definition language. These are the commands we can use in data definition for defining this language. Next, what about DML? Data manipulation language. That means for manipulating the data, what I can do. So first one, insert command, insert, INSERT, sorry, 1 minute. INSERT, insert. Next one, update. That means I'm manipulating the data here. Next one, delete. next one merge, next one call, and so on. Many are there. Okay, so mainly we are going to observe about insert, update, and delete. These are what DML commands. Next, if you want to see about DCL, that is nothing but what? Data control language. So grant and revoke. Okay. Next, DQL. Here we can consider select. DQL is what? Select. So in this 4, we are going to see about DML, DQL, and DDL. In this also, we are going to use only some of the commands only. So here, what is meant by data definition language? So it is going to define what is the, it may be creating a database, it may be creating a table. It's going to define, okay, something. Next, if you are going to see the concept of DML means what? Manipulation. Here it is going to deal with the manipulation of the data. Manipulate, that means already data is there. To manipulate the data, we are going to use these commands like insert, update, delete, merge, call, and all these commands. So these are called as what? Data manipulation language. Next, if you are going to see about the concept of DCL means what? Data control language. So here it deals with the what? Controls. That is nothing but what? Permissions, rights, these type of controls it is going to deal with. So here we are going to grant or revoke permissions. Grant means what? Giving the users access privilege. That means what? If anybody want to access the database, so by using this grant, I can give the permissions to that particular user. Okay. Next, if you are going to see about next one, DQL is nothing but data query language. So here by using these commands, what we can do here, we can perform some queries on the data. Okay, so we are calling it as a data query languages. That means what? Already data is there. To get that, we are going to use select. So we can also have one more, that is like TCL is there. So TCL is called as transaction control language. So transaction control language. So here generally it is going to deal with a transaction with the database. Okay, it deals with what? It deals with the transaction within the databases. So like commit, rollback, we can consider here commit, rollback, save point, set transaction, many other things are there. Okay, so sometimes in DML also we can consider this commit and rollback, but generally if you are going to categorize clearly, we have to consider TCL as commit and rollback. So commit and rollback are somewhat important. So in this among, I will discuss some of the important commands. So in DDL I will discuss, in DML, and if you are going to consider DQL, I will consider, and DCL is not such important now because we are not in depth about this database query language. So that I will discuss only about DDL, DML, DQL, and also like commit and rollback also. So these are the different type of commands we are going to use. Okay, as we are not in depth about this database, just whatever the things that are used for our Python program, I am going to discuss only them. Okay, so just already we have discussed about 4 points. Now fifth point I want to discuss. Fifth point is what? We have to use some of the commands already I have discussed. So generally in DML, so already I told you, in DML we can apply two functions or two commands like commit and rollback. So these are which type of commands? These are TCL commands. So these can be applied on DML. So we are having these functions. Called as commit and rollback. When I can apply these commit and rollback functions, when I'm going to apply some of the commands of DML, that means let us consider I am manipulating the data. So what I have to do? One thing I have to do is save that modifications. Otherwise, if you don't want that modifications, we will have to undo that. Undo. So for that, for saving in our language, for saving, I am going to use commit. For undoing purpose, we am going to the concept of rollback. When these two functions can be applied only with DML, data manipulation, because here only we are going to manipulate. Whenever manipulation is done, at that time only we require some commit and rollback. Okay, right. Next, if you are going to consider sixth step, if we want to retrieve the data, for example, I want to get the data. Mainly here, I already steps are completed. 4 steps are completed. Those are the 4 steps we have to understand. These are, I should not say these are the steps. Just I will remove these as the steps. Just what are the different methods we are going to use other than those 4 steps I am going to discuss here. Okay, right. So some more methods. That means what, if you want to fetch some records from your database, I can use some methods like fetch method. So fetch means what? It is going to fetch only one record. Okay, or one row we can consider. One row. Okay, one row. Next, if you are going to consider fetch all means what? It is going to fetch all the records, sorry, should not say records, it has a rows, all the rows. So as it is going to return all the rows, it is going to return in the form of a list. It is going to return in the form of list. Next, if you don't want to fetch one, if you don't want to fetch all, I want to fetch only some of the things. That means what, 10 or 20 or 30, for example. So I have to write fetch many of n. N value I have to write. That means what? It is going to fetch first n values. That is nothing but first n rows. It is going to fetch what? First n rows of the data. So here, what are the main functions we have to observe here? First one is, first function we have to use is what? Connect. First function is connect. Next one is cursor. Next one, execute of one query. Here we have to write what? SQL query. Next we can say execute script. In bracket, what we have to write? Queries. There only one query. Here one query, here queries. Next we can also write what? Execute many. Okay, here we can pass what? To execute parameterized queries, we are going to use execute many. Okay, next we are having what? Commit and rollback. When we have to use this commit and rollback, when we are going to apply the concept of data manipulation language, then we can use these two functions. Those are commit and rollback. Next, for fetching, we can use what? Fetch. Next, we can use fetch all, or we can use fetch many. In bracket, we have to write one parameter. So these are the different type of functions we are going to apply in our programs. So mainly these are the important functions. So we are going to focus, okay, after completing all these methods, after completing every task, what we are going to do? We are going to apply the concept of close. For closing the resource, we have to apply which function? Close function. What we have to close? I have to close the connection. I have to close the connection object, and I have to close the cursor object. For that, what I have to write? Connection dot close, cursor dot close I have to use. Okay, right. Now this connection, cursor, execute script, execute many, commit, rollback, fetch all, fetch many, all these are going to be applied, and close also. These are not it is not specific for any of the databases. These are all common methods for all data types, all databases. We can apply these functions on any type of database. There is no problem. So that first, initially, before going to any database, I am going to explain these functions. Okay, what are those? First one is connect. Next one is what? Cursor. Next one is execute. Next, execute script. Next one is what? Execute many, commit, rollback, fetch, or here we can say fetch one. Okay, we can say what? There fetch one, we can say, not fetch. It is what? Fetch one. Okay, right. Fetch one is for what? Fetching only one record. Right? Fetch one, next one fetch all, fetch many, and last one is what? Close. These are not the, it is not specific for any of the databases. Okay, it can be applied on any type of database. That is, these methods won't be changed from database to database. It is same for all the databases.